Welcome to Well Warrior Culture, a community of support based on my books, Wellness Warrior Style, Mindfulness for Warriors, the Mindfulness for Warriors Handbook, and the 21-Day Meditation Jumpstart Journal. This is the Well Warrior Show, and I'm your host, Kim Colgrove. I work with society's warriors, protectors, guardians, and healers, and your families to help you rebuild resilience and embrace well-being. If your profession exposes you to trauma and the trauma of others, Well Warrior Culture is for you. You deserve to live, work, and retire healthfully, and I'm glad you're here. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to the Well Warrior Show. I'm your host, Kim Colgrove, and today I'm sitting down with Rachel Murdock. Rachel is a clinician and a group practice owner, and they specialize in first responder wellness. So first of all, I want to welcome you, Rachel, to the Well Warrior Show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
I'm really happy to talk to you today. And there are a couple of things that I want to talk to you about based on the work that I've done and the people that I've interviewed and talked to over the years. Most especially, I'd like to focus on alcohol today, alcohol use, alcohol abuse, and some of the hurdles to facing that and dealing with that. But first, I'd like you to introduce yourself to our audience, if you would, please.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I am a group practice owner, and my practice is located in downtown Blue Springs, Missouri, so Eastern Jackson County. And I just reopened about 15 months ago after leaving a 10-and-a-half-year career with the FBI working crimes against children. So I worked crimes against children for about 17 years, started initially down at a child advocacy center in Springfield, Missouri. Then I relocated back to Kansas City, which is where I grew up in the Blue Springs area, for a forensic interviewer position with the FBI. So I was, at the time, one of 5 forensic interviewers in the country that specialized in federal interviews of crimes, of kids who were victims of federal crimes. When I left the program, it was close to 20 interviewers, so definitely lots of growth. And when I was deciding that I wanted to leave the FBI, I wanted to make sure that I was doing something that was still really meaningful and provided value in the community, because I was doing something so important. And I was noticing over the years that first responders don't take great care of themselves. They tend to give and give and give and help and let their own needs go unnoticed. So when I was making the transition, I wanted to have a practice that first responders could come to and know that I'm someone who understands the demands on the job, but also a place where they can get support and do things differently so they can feel differently. But it grew quickly. And so now I have 5 employees and 2 interns in my practice, and we are able to provide tons of different services, but there are a few of us that focus on first responder mental health. And so it's been a really great and wild ride, kind of getting out of federal service.
I'll bet. I love everything you're saying. I love everything you do. So there are several of you within your practice that focus on first responder health and well-being, mental health and well-being.
Yes.
That's fantastic. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the end before we wrap up. And I'll include all of your information in the show notes too, for anyone who sees this episode. But I asked you before we started recording if your practice has openings. And you said, yeah, that you do have some clinicians in your practice that are accepting new clients. And that's important for our listeners that are in the greater Kansas City area, because I know they're always looking for culturally competent therapists that understand trauma. And really, it's important, I think, that first responders find a therapist that understands the first responder culture as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we'll give all that information before we wrap up. And then again, I'll provide it for everyone so they'll know how to get a hold of you if they're looking for a clinician. Well, that's fantastic. And your work with the FBI was, I'm sure, grueling and
Yeah.
difficult, but such important work. Do you have anyone in your history, in your family, or in your history that worked as a first responder or was in the military, or what was your pull to working with that demographic?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I actually don't. I was the first person to work for a law enforcement agency in my immediate family. I kind of have some distant relatives. I've got kind of a cousin by marriage who is a police officer, but really it was just kind of a amazing opportunity that came my way. I was already doing the forensic interview side and have always had a real passion for the intersection between criminal justice and forensic psychology. And so the forensic interview piece became really interesting to me. And when the FBI posted the position in Kansas City, it was just an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. I thought, wow, this is a really premier law enforcement agency, and I would get to work different type of cases because I was working state level cases prior, and so it was fantastic. And I was a civilian in the FBI, and it gave me a really unique perspective. So I've got a real passion for both sworn law enforcement, but also civilians in law enforcement agencies, because I feel like there can sometimes be a disconnect between services on the civilian side as well. So when I speak about first responders, I'm also including that we provide support to civilians and first responder agencies and also spouses of first responders, because I think all of those populations have unique needs because of their first responder culture.
100%, and they have traditionally been underserved.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up. Thank you for bringing that up. Those are two populations that are near and dear to my heart. I obviously have the spouse perspective,
Right.
but I meet a lot of people who work across these professions in this warrior world, and they'll even demean themselves sometimes about, well,
Right.
I'm not sworn, or well, I don't. But if you work within the organization or the agency, you see it, you know it, you hear it, you read it, you're exposed to it,
Right.
and so you count. You're one of them. You are
Right.
one of them. Yeah. So
Right.
it makes me sad when I hear people, demean themselves, or when I come across organizations that leave the civilians out of the
Right.
equation. Yeah.
Right.
That
Yeah,
was a
because I
great
always
point.
felt I felt like there was sometimes a need to say, "Oh, but I'm not an agent," or "I'm just a support employee." And I thought, man, I'm not just anything. I was exposed to child sexual abuse material, the lion's share of my career, and I saw a lot more than people may connect with the civilian role. And so I think that's exactly right. Like you still matter, and your experiences matter, and your mental health matters. And you don't have to necessarily be on the front lines to be impacted. And so I like that there's room for both.
Yes, and I want to say it a little louder for the people in the back that
Right,
work
right,
for the corrections organizations that we work with, law enforcement, fire, like all the professions,
yep,
victim service advocates, and social workers, and
right,
all the support people, all the surrounding people, all the admin people, all the clerk people, everybody. If you work for one of these organizations or agencies, you are in this group. There, we
yes,
said it.
we
Hopefully
said
everyone heard it. Yes.
it.
Okay, well, so I originally reached out to you. I think we actually kind of met on LinkedIn, but we
Yeah,
live in the same city and we have a lot of people in common. But
right,
when I learned that you work, when I learned about your background, and I've had a lot of conversations over the years and in my books with people who struggled or are struggling with alcohol use, alcohol abuse, addiction, and recovery. And so that's one of the main topics I wanted to touch on today. I guess what I would want to speak out to people, and what I'm hoping people can glean from our conversation, is that it's very common. You're not
yes,
alone. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. If you haven't addressed it, if you suspect you have an issue, or you know you do and you haven't addressed it, then you are probably living with some unnecessary shame. And I just
right,
kind of want to touch on all those things that we know are very common. I just like to give people an opportunity to let themselves off the hook a little bit
yes,
and know that you're not alone in this. Others have faced it and overcome, and just kind of give people some direction. Maybe by the end of this conversation, give them some direction, some first steps. So
sure.
I'm guessing that you probably work with and have worked with a lot of first responders who struggle with alcohol use.
I have. And, what you just said is spot on because alcohol is the number one used substance in probably in society in general, but certainly in first responder culture. And so to normalize that it can be an issue and that there are things you can do to get get out of it is, I think, an important message. So it is common. You are not alone, and there are ways that you can cope with what you are exposed to: the job stress, the workplace stress, the home stuff, and not have alcohol be the coping mechanism of choice or the way that you regulate your nervous system.
Yes, I think for the most part, you work one-on-one with a lot of people, and I work more in the group setting and in the classroom type of setting. But something that I think is really common is they're so stressed and they're so overwhelmed and they're exposed to so much secondary trauma, and so their nervous systems are just jagged, which makes
Right,
sense,
right,
and they have to do something to calm or to numb out so that they can step out of that sometimes,
right.
and they don't understand the process of the amygdala and the stress hormones that are dumped into the system when the amygdala is activated, when the stress response, the fight, flight, freeze is
Hmm.
activated. They don't understand that process, and they don't understand that there are other things they can do to calm and cool off their own nervous systems.
Right,
And so they rely on whatever they use to numb out: social media, alcohol, whatever that is. But they're smart people. And so once we educate them or we inform them, I find that they get it. We address their
right.
analytical mind, like, hey, there are other things you can do. And then they get it. And then the hard part, I'm sure you'll agree, is them taking those initial first steps, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah. Do you have any
absolutely.
advice for someone who's there right now? Like, they know it's a
Yeah.
problem. It either has already caused them relationship problems or other problems, and they know that there's the potential that, maybe their marriage is in trouble, or maybe it's caused them some trouble at work. So what would you recommend to someone who's sitting in that right now, but for whatever reason, they're not ready or they're afraid to take that step or to go to counseling? Would you have any advice?
Yeah. So, I think that we kind of broached on it earlier, finding a culturally competent therapist that understands what it's like to be in a first responder position is a great first step because there isn't going to be judgment because we know that alcohol is widely used as a coping mechanism in this field. When we think about officer involved shootings and other critical incidents, what's one of the first things that happens? The lodge is open and everybody gets together and drinks. Or, we have choir practice and everybody drinks after shift. And so we recognize that this is something that has been normalized in the culture. And the reality is that alcohol is a depressant. And so it does help your nervous system calm down. So it does feel reinforcing to drink. When we are stressed and dysregulated, we drink, we feel better, and then it tells our brain, hey, do that again because it actually helps. So you can have alcohol use issues and also still be really great at your job, a really great spouse, but it doesn't mean that it's not still a problem. And so I wanted to mention that as well, because I think sometimes people think, well, I'm not the people I arrest, or I'm not unemployed, or my wife is still with me, or my husband hasn't figured this out yet, that it may not be an issue. But you have to be honest with yourself. And so one of the questions that I ask my clients is not only how much you're drinking, but also why you're drinking. And I think when we define that why, if your why is to reduce stress, to wind down, to numb out, that is where it could be a problem. And so maybe getting a neutral party involved, whether that's a peer or a clinician or a chaplain or whomever is available for that, to give you some feedback about your drinking habits, someone you can be wholeheartedly honest with so we know what we're dealing with, and just that motivation to change. Like, why do you want this to get better? How is it showing up for you in ways that are detrimental? Are you starting to have trouble getting out of bed? Are you starting to have headaches? Are you noticing you're spending more money? Whatever that is. But all of that to say that some of our first responders can really minimize their alcohol use, and also that it's a problem. But if you are there and you recognize if it's a problem, know that we can teach your nervous system to regulate itself in a healthy way. Of course, Kim talks about that a lot in her books, and there's tons of research out there about all kinds of ways, both in the clinical setting and in the mindfulness, meditation, yoga setting, where all of that can be true. So just long answer to say there are lots more healthy ways to provide sustainable regulation. So even though in the short term drinking feels helpful, it's not sustainable because there will be consequences.
That's the problem. That's the
Right,
problem. Nobody
right,
escapes that.
right,
If it doesn't cause your marriage to end, you know, or it doesn't cause you to get a DUI,
right,
or those, really serious external consequences, it will cause physical consequences eventually. Nobody
right,
can be a habitual drinker for their entire life, their entire adult life, and not experience some kind of physical health issues around that. So,
sure.
so there's that piece, not trying to lay a guilt trip on anybody, just inform and educate. So I can hear people listening to this that know, I probably drink a little too much, or, I probably should cut back, or maybe they're even, getting close to crisis. But I can hear people, some of the questions that they might ask you, or some of the resistance.
Sure.
So what do you say to people if they say, I hear you, but I don't want to completely give up drinking?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, and I think that that's a valid concern and something that comes up. And usually my advice is, it may be that we do have to mostly give up drinking initially to teach our body different ways to cope, because it's just too easy to go back to those habits. But I also recognize that 100% sobriety may not be someone's goal, and I want to meet people where they're at. So maybe if we can reduce the amount of drinking in isolation, or we can reduce the volume, like I like to make incremental steps to the eventual goal. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. If you've been drinking 3 or 4 drinks a day, 7 days a week, I wouldn't expect that it would sound appealing or easy to go from 28 to 0. But what we might be able to say is, could we cut back the volume of drinking? Because we know that when people say that they have one drink, it's usually not the right measurement for one. So, for example,
yes. Is it
for hard
1.5
alcohol,
ounces of alcohol
right,
in
right.
your mixer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
it's 3 ounces, that's 2 drinks. And so
Hmm.
just really trying to get a handle on what we're drinking, when we're drinking, why we're drinking, and then being realistic with ourselves. So if you're somebody who says, man, I've been doing this for so long, it's going to take me a while to cut back, that is okay. So first responders can sometimes have black and white thinking, and it's very all or nothing. Like,
For sure.
okay, we got to fix this, and we're going to, do it tomorrow, and we're going to stop completely. And that may not be realistic. So we want to be able to say, what's the eventual goal and what are the small steps that we can take to get there, knowing that lapses are common and people will find themselves kind of using more alcohol than they may have desired to. But that doesn't mean that it's like it's over and just like, okay, forget it. We're just going to go back to, full steam ahead. So there is a middle ground, there is a compromise, and there's a continuum of cutting down in any behavior that we want to reduce. It doesn't have to be that all or nothing.
Yeah, okay, I love that. So there's some flexibility built in, and you're 100% right. Obviously, black and white thinkers, problem solvers, if I'm going to do it, I'm
Right.
going to do it. I'm not going to, tap dance around it. I guess the difference in this advice might be somebody, if you're in crisis, if you sit alone in a room by yourself and say, I'm an alcoholic, uh, you know, then maybe a program is going to be right for you. Maybe
Right.
it is time. Maybe you will have to quit. That is just the reality for some people.
Right.
But until you slow down and do some self-assessment and some self-reflection, and maybe talk to somebody, a mentor or a therapist or a counselor or a chaplain or someone, kind of talk it through and feel into it and identify whether or not you're at that level that you would need that level of intervention, or
Right.
with some support and counseling, you might be able to bring your drinking to what might be a more social or acceptable level. Either way, it's worth the exploration, and all of it's going to take some self-assessment and self-reflection and self-awareness, because
Right.
if you just keep living in this habitual fashion, kind of doing the same things you've always done, and if it's just your go-to, like you walk in the door at the end of your shift and you go grab that beer or whatever, and that's become habitual, I'm not going to lie to anyone and say that it's going to be easy to repattern, but
Right.
it's doable, and many others have done it. And a lot of the people that I've interviewed for my books have done it, and others just brought some moderation to all the habits that were detrimental to their relationships or
Right.
to their health or to their life or to their job.
Right. And
Yeah.
you're right. There's not a one size fits all approach, just like anything else. Treatment is personalized. And you're right. There may be some people who sobriety is the need, or they are in a position where they are in a life threatening state due to their level of drinking. And so, but not everyone's there. And so there's no shame wherever you are on that continuum, but just recognizing that it's not all or nothing for everyone. And for some, it may need to be that, but it reminds me of the same type of stigma associated about at reaching out for help with suicidal ideation. I think people expect that if they whisper anything about suicide, they will instantly be thrown in a residential facility or hospital. And there are, again, it's on a continuum of, more passive suicidality to more active suicidality. And yes, are there people that do need more acute care? Absolutely. But there's also some steps ahead of that. So it's kind of the same concept with alcohol use. There are some people that absolutely need a detox program and more acute care. And then there's others that we can work on moderation and figure out if we need to work on coping skill development or stress management or whatnot to decrease those behaviors. So even if, your coworker who decided they needed help had this experience or that experience, it doesn't mean that'll be the same for you, because everybody's needs are very personalized.
Yes, great point. I have two couples in my newest book, Wellness Warrior Style, that both talk about the problem of alcohol. Alcohol was a huge problem in their
Mhm.
path and in their relationship. And in both cases, so I would any spouses that are sort of trapped in this, my spouse is drinking too much and self-medicating and it's, causing a problem. I would say maybe go read the stories of these two couples. One, in one instance, um, one individual's wife finally gave him an ultimatum that,
Mhm.
this is leading us down a bad road, and you need to do this. And he did. And, it completely turned his life around, obviously.
Yeah.
And then in the other case, there was just a severely traumatic incident that led to the individual going for treatment and to stop using alcohol, which he'll say now saved his life, saved his marriage, was the best thing he ever did. And then I know plenty of other people who just learned other coping mechanisms and other skills and just brought a little more balance and health and wellness and mindfulness and awareness just into their life, and can still drink socially, So
Mhm.
so I guess I'm always thinking about who might be listening, and where
Yeah.
they might be on this trajectory. So, I'm just trying to give ideas and suggestions and let people know there's flexibility. But the one thing that you don't want to continue to do past today and listening to Rachel and I is just keep existing in this if it's causing you problems. So my suggestion would be take one step of any kind, go read an article, go read a book, look for a podcast, reach out to a trusted mentor, chaplain, counselor, peer support, whatever that would be. Takes one step today and just start thinking about it, talking about it, making a step towards healing that, because it's doable. And, I want to say to every person that might be listening, this warrior culture, and that to me, in my definition, that includes a lot of people, not just military and veterans and
Mhm.
first responders, but there's a lot of surrounding professions that really are warriors and are like your role with the FBI. That's a warrior. You're every day moving towards danger and trauma and exposing yourself to that for the betterment or the defense of someone else. And so what I would say is you guys are smart people. You're some of our type A personality, go-getter, goal setter, goal attainer people. You can pretty much do anything you set your mind to, or you wouldn't be in this profession. And taking care of yourself, saving your own life and your own marriage, and making these changes that'll be better for your overall life experience, you can do that too.
Yeah.
Just apply the same discipline that you apply to the profession to yourself. You kicked off the hour by saying they sometimes don't take very good care of themselves. And that is true because they are the help. I am the help. I am the fixer, the saver, the rescuer. I shouldn't need to be rescued.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's shift a little bit here. Maybe just moving a little bit out of the conversation about alcohol and talk about some of the other issues around first responders. And I'm going to just say warriors because, as I said earlier, I think before I started recording, was victim service advocates, people in roles like the role you had with the FBI, social workers, parole, probation, correction, like all these, kind of you don't think of as being traditional first responders. The stigma around, maybe not so much in social work and mental health professions, but the stigma around getting help or anyone in knowing you're going to get help is so huge and such a block for so many people. And I'm sure you encounter that. Can we talk a little bit about that stigma that prevents people from getting the help and support that could help them? It doesn't mean it has to be a career ender. It can help you to live and work and retire healthfully. So what do you see in that world of stigma and shame?
Yeah. So I think you're exactly right. We are making quite a shift in mental health and first responders because we're talking about it. And when we talk to our seasoned warriors, this is a big change for them because in the academy, they were taught, suck it up, buttercup. This doesn't bother you. You need to find a way to compartmentalize. And so for many of them, when they come into my office for a wellness check, which is something that I do with a few different law enforcement agencies on the Missouri side. I meet with them once a year just to assess psychological wellness and provide resources, referrals. It's something that is a statutory mandate on the Missouri side and has been kind of coming down the pike. But for many of the seasoned warriors, they say, no offense, but this is uncomfortable. Or I don't quite know where to begin because I've been burying things for so long. So my message to anyone is that it's never too late. So even if you're at year 35 and you have 35 years of, things that you have never processed, it's never too late to start. Because at some point, because we know the body keeps the score, it will come out if it hasn't already been. I think people think that they're doing a better job keeping things contained than they really are because you get that crack in the foundation and maybe you're more irritable. Maybe your spouse has been saying things to you about your drinking. Maybe you're not as focused at work. There's just different ways that these things can show up. So the stigma, we are trying to remove it. We have individuals who are being vocal about their own mental health journeys so people can know that it's not always who you expect that has been seeking help. It is the tough people. It is the individuals who seem strong. And it just to normalize that we were not biologically designed to go through this life alone. So this constant decision that people make to suffer in isolation, it just does not work. It is not how we are wired. So know that you can find a counselor, even if you went to someone years ago and they weren't a good fit. Just know that there has been a lot of research, a lot of updates, and there's a lot of us, particularly I can speak about the Kansas City Metro, but I know nationwide as well. But there's a lot of us here that have a true dedication to this population, and we get it, and we can help you in a different way. A couple of my newer clients came in and their last experience with a clinician was that they made their clinician cry when they shared things. And we hear that, right? Which is
Yes.
so horrifying to me when someone reaches out for help and that's the reaction they get. And I understand if that clinician isn't prepared for that information. They're a human, so I'm not speaking negatively towards that individual, but that individual is not the right fit for this population. So even if
Yeah.
you had a negative experience before, it doesn't mean that counseling doesn't work if your counselor didn't work for you. Because that's why there's more than one of us, because you need to find someone who resonates with you, who understands, who you vibe with, because you can feel better. And I'm amazed at the transition I see in clients when they first come into me. And then when it's time for termination, it is earth shattering, but it's because of all people, you guys know how to work hard and commit and be goal oriented. So you can really transform things. So I want to give hope that it's not too late and that there are many clinicians that specialize in working with first responder populations. And there are tons of different things you can try to feel better.
Yes. And to your point, you said if you went years ago and therapy was a bad experience, don't let that cloud your vision now. I would add to that and say if you went to a counselor last week and it wasn't a good experience, don't give up. That doesn't mean
Yeah,
counseling isn't going to work for you. That means
right,
you didn't find the right counselor yet, or you didn't give the counselor enough of a chance. So
right,
if you go one time and you can't stand the person, yeah, your personalities just might not mesh. But
right.
maybe give it 3 or 4 sessions. And I understand how uh, difficult this is for people to uh, open up to when they know they may have to therapist shop. That they like it's
Yeah,
such a hassle to find someone, and then if it doesn't click, and so they just keep procrastinating it, or they don't want to deal with all that, or they have so much else going on in their life already they can't imagine adding one more thing.
right.
However, the effort can be so worth the outcome that I would say, please give it one more chance. Please give it a chance. And to your point about finding the right therapist, for you, can you tick off a list? I know a little bit about this for people who are open or looking for a clinician or a therapist. So you want to make sure upfront that they are trauma informed, that they understand trauma. I mean, I'll just let you, because I don't know all the verbiage, but I'll just let you
Sure.
take that. And so let's say some person, okay, I'm willing to give it a shot. When I make my calls, what questions do I ask?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'll answer it kind of twofold. There are some resources that you can use online to help guide you where someone has already vetted counselors who have cultural competence. One of those is First Midwest over on the Kansas side. The organization is run over there, but they have clinicians on the Missouri and Kansas side, and then Missouri side, FRPN, First Responder Provider Network, has a list as well. So I know that listeners are listening from all over, but for a lot of agencies, there may be a list that is already generated of people who have been vetted. So that takes a little bit of the work off of your plate because they have already shown a commitment and shown expertise in that area. But as you mentioned, Kim, trauma informed is huge. Cultural competence can look a few different ways. So sometimes it's because you were a former first responder or worked in a former or a first responder agency. But for many of our clinicians, maybe that experience and expertise came from networking and having relationships with first responder agencies by doing ride alongs, doing trainings. And so you don't have to have been a first responder to be a first responder clinician. There are some who do both, but there's also individuals who are married to first responders, have, blue families or first responder families. So I think that it's just a general question is, what is your experience working with first responders? Because we don't want people who simply support first responders to be deemed as culturally competent if they don't have those additional skills necessary. There's different treatment methods, and so there's not necessarily one size fits all. But asking about, ability to be exposed to what first responders are exposed to, but I know for me, if someone called and said, "Hey, what's your experience working with first responders?" That would be a very easily answered question for me because it is what I do. And so if there's a pause or there's some hesitation or someone isn't quite able to answer that, there may be your answer. But just look in your own agencies if there is already a list, because I know peer support programs often have a list of individuals who've been vetted. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And the way that I explain counseling to my first responders during these wellness checks is, if you treat it like a haircut, you can go get a bad haircut, but you're not going to swear off getting a haircut for the rest of your life. You're just going to find someone else. And so people, kind of laugh because we've all had terrible haircuts, but we don't say like, we're just never going to cut our hair again. So if we treat counseling the same and say, I haven't had a good experience yet, or I haven't had the right person, sometimes we have to be honest with ourselves. Is it because someone called us on our stuff and we weren't ready to hear it? Did we not give that person a chance? Were we not ready? Or was it really about the other person? And all of that could be true. But I would argue that I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but that doesn't make me a bad clinician. But if you don't, feel connected with me, it also doesn't mean you have to stick with me. And so,
Yeah, for sure. So if somebody
it's,
came to you and felt like, this is not quite my, and then they wanted to try someone else in your group, you wouldn't have your feelings hurt. You
oh gosh,
understand that,
no.
yeah, because I think that might prevent someone like,
Oh yeah,
but that's just normal. I mean, I've been to hairdressers that I'm like, "Oh,
right,
I don't really enjoy my time there. So I'm going to go find
right,
it might not be about the
right,
haircut, just might be about our personalities or,
right.
or that. Okay. So you touched on so many important things there. I'm going to do my best to include some links in the show notes to help guide people to where they can go to look for vetted clinicians and therapists in their area. And I'm going to do my best to come up with a couple of national links that might help them.
Sure,
So, and I may reach out to you to help me provide some links.
definitely.
I'm familiar with some of what you talked about through my work with the Battle Within locally.
Yes, yes.
But you have, so all of your clinicians in your group have the ability to work with veterans and first responders in that warrior population, or you have certain partners within or certain clinicians within your group?
So I have kind of a couple that are more earmarked because I have one clinician who is former EMS. So she was a first responder, has also done a lot of crisis work, trauma work. And then I have another clinician who has family members who are retired from a local police department. So the three of us are kind of the go-tos when someone does call looking for a clinician that works with first responders. But I have other clinicians that are trained in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a common trauma treatment.
Yeah.
And so certainly I would lean in. I definitely trust all of my clinicians. We just all have different areas of expertise. And so I would say of the seven of us, there are three that kind of take the lead on that. But even if, someone came to our practice and we aren't the right fit, I have no issue, referring out our connections in first responder clinician world are pretty tight. And so you don't have to worry about, we all have thick skins, or I don't think we could work with first responders because that's
Yeah.
just who we need to be. But I never have an issue making a referral for whatever reason. And so just know that that's another option is, if you get your foot in the door with someone who's at least connected in the community, even if that person isn't a good fit or whatever it is, if you need someone else, we can at least try to cut some of the red tape for you and maybe make that personal connection just to make the process easier.
Okay, fantastic. And so I want to say that this conversation doesn't just pertain to first responders. I want to make sure I'm inclusive of first responder spouses, significant others, children, adult children of first responders, all the surrounding siblings, parents,
Yes.
anyone who is struggling with someone you in your life or you love that is a first responder that, and that their work or the fallout that they're experiencing from the work is impacting your life. If you can't get them to go, maybe you need to go and talk to a
Yes.
therapist or a counselor to help you process through some of what you experience. So that's important. Also, I'm curious if you would recommend, let's say there's a first responder couple and they're struggling, they're having some issues within
Mhm.
their marriage, their relationship, or whatever it is, and the first responder professional is, experiencing some issues that's impacting the home front. Would you recommend those two do counseling separately, or would it be a good idea for them to do counseling as a couple, or both, or neither?
Yeah, I
What
was
would you
going to
recommend?
say yes. But no, truth told, couples work, in my opinion, works best when each member of the couple is also working on themselves individually.
Makes
So
sense. That
it
makes
doesn't
sense.
have to be like in a certain order though, because maybe the first responder spouse is the one who has that readiness for change sooner and can begin counseling. And then whenever it's deemed appropriate, next steps can be taken. And so maybe let's say a first responder spouse refuses to go to individual counseling. It doesn't mean that couples work can't still be done. So there are definitely a lot of different options, but when we think about what individual counseling is, it helps us to show up as our best, healthiest self. And when we have that, we can be our best, healthiest as a couple. So I find them to work really well in tandem. But again, if you are listening and you're a first responder spouse thinking like there is no way that my husband or wife would go to counseling, it doesn't mean that you can't get that support to be able to navigate that, because I've been there in my practice where I've worked with spouses first, and then I've said, let's get them to at least come in. They can, suss me out and kind of figure things out. And I know that I'm, getting the evaluation during that first time, but lo and behold, they start it and it's not so bad, and they realize that we're not going to just sing kumbaya and braid their hair, that they can cuss and they can be real and they can do what they need to do. And a lot of times it really is just getting that foot in the door. So whatever order needs to happen for someone's family, but just know that as the spouse or the family or the child, there are resources for you too. And it's okay, even if it takes a year of you doing that work on your own before the other person gets up to speed.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. If you or anyone in your group works with children and families, and if you ever have because to me, the perfect
Yes.
recipe, which might seem not doable to a lot of people, but the perfect recipe would be for everyone in the family if there have been issues,
Yes.
because anyone in the household is they may not verbalize it, but they're feeling it.
Hmm.
They know what's
Yes.
happening. So the perfect recipe to me would be to bring, at some point involve everyone in your household when you're on
Yeah.
this trajectory of healing, and
Yeah.
trying to bring wellness to yourself and to your relationship. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh gosh. Okay. So you said so many important things there. The main thing that I want to say to people is, whatever your barriers are, there's someone somewhere that can help you with your barriers. I mean, if your health insurance doesn't cover it, then there's community mental health that we can find resources there. If you don't want your employer to know, you can go outside of your city or outside of your county. Like whatever your barriers are, don't let them be barriers.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, we'll provide the contact information for you and your group in case anyone in the greater Kansas City area is looking for support. And as always, I always say to my audience, you're always welcome to reach out to me, and I will always help you to the best of my ability to find resources or find a way to help you get past whatever barriers are preventing you from seeking counseling. Because, and hear me, please, everyone who's listening, if you have been resistant to counseling in your life, if the stigma, whatever it is, has prevented you from, walking down that path, I will tell you a whole bunch of your peers, thousands and thousands of people across the country who once also resisted counseling have healed themselves mentally, emotionally, healed relationships with spouses, with siblings, with friends, with children by utilizing counseling. So we've got to open our minds and open our hearts a little bit to possibilities. All of this should be presented to all of these people as they're going through training in their
Right.
academy. I mean, it should be,
Right.
and I'm hoping we're moving in that direction eventually. But for now, it's up to people like you and me who are out here trying to, to help people and provide resources, because what we've been doing for generations isn't working. It's
Right.
not working,
Right.
and it's
Right.
not sustainable for you to go and give of yourself for 30 or 35 years, just completely drain yourself mentally, emotionally, kill relationships, and then think you're going to retire and be healthy and happy and relax then and enjoy life then. It just doesn't always happen that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what
So
a bummer. Like you give that all those years of service, and the point in life that should be most restorative for you can be when all the demons come flooding in. So we want to get people to a place of health so you can enjoy the time that you don't have to give and be on call and be pulled into, critical incidents. So,
that's exactly right. And I,
yeah,
unfortunately, am worst case scenario of what can
right,
happen when
right,
someone doesn't deal with those demons over the course of a 30-year
right,
career and
right,
then decides to retire. I mean, that's what happened with my husband. He decided to retire. Externally and practically, he had everything in place. He spent the last 2 years of his career working on a business venture with a business partner. They were set to roll out that business. But when he retired, exactly what you just said, all those demons came floating up to the surface. And because
right,
it all rushed up at once in those last several months before he actually technically retired, it was just more than he could deal with, and
right,
he took his own life. So I'm the worst case scenario of what can
right,
happen. There are a lot of other really bad scenarios of people
right,
ending up divorced and adult children they're estranged from, and all, health problems and
right.
all kinds of things. So we're not trying to give anyone a guilt trip or beat up on anyone. In fact, we love you people, or we wouldn't be working with you. We're
Right.
just trying to give you information and options and resources. So before we wrap up and say our goodbyes, is there anything else you'd like to say to anyone who might be listening about the work, or about, any advice, or about your group practice, or just anything?
Yeah. No, I really appreciate the conversation because I just think it can't happen often enough. Like we have to be able to give hope that the things can change and they can get better, because maybe you're listening and you feel like you've done everything or you've tried everything, and um, maybe it's just time to try something different or try it again, and just know that there's resources and support and people that do understand. And if we do what we've always done, we're going to get what we always get. And so I really encourage you to find someone to help hold you accountable to get to those goals, because of course, I have a heart for warriors just like him, but of all people on this earth, I feel like we give so much and we put ourselves on the back burner for so long. And eventually, our bodies will start screaming if we don't listen to those whispers. And so just doing an audit of yourself right now and saying, like, how am I really doing? Like, not what I tell people, but how am I really doing? And if you feel like there's something that you could work on, even if it's a minor issue, let's tackle it. Because people think they need to wait until they're flatlining to seek mental health support, and that's not true. I'm a therapist and I have a therapist because I want to make sure that I'm good. And people sometimes are like, what? But you know what to do. And it's like, yeah, but I'm a human and I'm also type A. And I doesn't mean I would do it for myself if I didn't have that accountability. And I'm not intended to treat myself and do it alone. So just know that there are things out there, resources, podcasts, books, all kinds of things that can help you to feel happy and fulfilled. Because the sad truth is that your job could be gone tomorrow, whether by choice or by incident. And I always encourage people to think about, what are you going home to when that happens?
Oh my gosh. This is something I say over and over and over. And this is the truth. And it's hard for some people to hear.
Yeah,
But when you leave this job, the job goes on the next day as if you never existed.
right,
But if you
right,
leave your life early for health problems, heaven forbid, suicide, or any other reason, your friends and family don't. Your
right,
friends and
right,
family do not go on the next day as if you never existed, but that job does. So
right,
you cannot give away everything to this job for 35 years and let the rest of your life and your own health fall apart. I
right.
mean, that really, it sounds dramatic, but it's what's happening.
Yeah,
And I want to speak to two things that you said. One is, as you were speaking, I was thinking about what I keep encountering in this work for 7 or 8 years now full time that I've done this work. And that is these informal leaders within their agencies and organizations. So they're not the ones that are promoting, that are the boss, but they're these informal leaders, and they tend to their own health first. And I guarantee you work with some of these people. They tend
Yeah.
to their own health, and then they get better and they heal their life and they feel better. And then they are no longer afraid or ashamed to speak out to people that they
Yes.
work with. And they're some of the most important leaders across these professions right now.
Yes.
The ones who are, and my books are full of them. There are these people who
Mm-hmm.
used to be like, no thanks, I'm not doing that touchy feely stuff. And then their life hit the skids for whatever
Right.
reason. And then
Right.
they did the healing work, and now they're still doing, some of them are retired, some of them are still working, but they're always reaching their hand out to their peers. So those are some really important informal leaders. And I've lost my train of thought on the other. This is why I keep a notepad, and you see me looking down because I'm jotting things down.
Right.
I
No, you're good.
didn't write down the other thing that you touched on. So we'll just skip that. My
Okay.
apologies.
No,
I
it's
have to
okay.
write everything down. Look at all these notes I have from you talking. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much for
Yeah.
the really important work that you do. I know that you've helped, gosh, probably thousands and thousands of people now because of that ripple effect when we live our life in service of others, that purpose-driven life. So
Yeah.
I sure appreciate the work that you do. I'm really happy to have this resource of your group to put out to people in the greater Kansas City area. So thanks for that. And then I'll just grab from you any contact information
Okay.
or links or anything else that you want to provide to the people who listen to this episode, and we'll throw all that in the show notes.
Okay. That
Any
sounds
closing
awesome.
thoughts?
No, like I said, I really appreciate just having the opportunity to hopefully just give someone some things to think about, and just know that you can feel better, and it will be hard work, but thankfully warriors are equipped for that. So it's never too late to do something different and to bet on yourself, because you are worth it.
Indeed. Just take some of that discipline and dedication and gift it to yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Rachel,
Definitely.
so great to talk to you. Thank you
Yes.
for your
Thank
time
you.
today.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.